There is a dream that comes to Meryl Streep in the deep hours of the night, always the same, always vivid. She is standing on an empty stage, the theater vast and silent around her. The seats stretch endlessly into darkness. She opens her mouth to speak, and no sound comes. She tries again, reaching for words, for voice, for anything, but there is only silence. Then, from somewhere in the shadows, she hears applause. Slow, deliberate, growing louder. Someone is clapping for a performance she hasn't given, celebrating something she hasn't done. She wakes with her heart racing, the question already forming, what if everything I've built is only what people wanted to see, not who I actually am? At 76, Meryl Streep moves through the world with a composure that seems effortless. She attends premieres and award ceremonies with the same grace she has maintained for decades. She reads scripts in her Connecticut home, surrounded by gardens she tends herself, each season bringing new blooms she has carefully planned and nurtured. She speaks to her adult children on the phone, listens to their lives with the same attentive care she brings to every role, offers gentle guidance when they ask for it. To the outside world, she appears settled, complete, a woman who has achieved everything and carries it lightly, as if success weighs nothing at all. But the dream persists. It comes most often during periods of quiet, when the work slows down and the space around her grows wider. In those moments, when there are no cameras, no scripts to memorize, no characters to inhabit, she finds herself confronting questions she thought she had answered decades ago. Questions about identity, about legacy, about the difference between who she has been and who she still might become. At this stage of life, most people look backward, cataloging memories and measuring their distance from youth, calculating what was gained and what was lost. Meryl finds herself looking forward into an uncertain territory, wondering what it means to continue when there is nothing left to prove, when every accolade has been received, when the world has already decided who you are. Last autumn, she received a script that unsettled her in a way she could not immediately name. The character was a woman in her mid-70s who had spent her entire life accommodating others, her husband, her children, her colleagues, her community. The story opened with this woman waking up one morning and realizing she could not remember the last time she had made a decision purely for herself. Not in service of a role, not to maintain peace in her family, not to meet expectations or fulfill obligations. Just for herself, from some deep and authentic place she could no longer locate. Meryl read the script 3 times in one sitting. Each time, she felt something tighten in her chest, a recognition she did not want to acknowledge. The character's confusion mirrored something she had been feeling for months, perhaps years, a sense that she had built such an elaborate architecture of performance and professionalism that she could no longer find the blueprint of who she actually was beneath it all. She told her agent she would think about it. Then she placed the script in a drawer in her study and tried to forget it, burying it beneath newer scripts, correspondence, articles she had clipped from magazines and meant to read but never did. But forgetting had never been one of her talents. She began noticing patterns in her own behavior that she had never examined before. The way she shaped her responses in interviews to give people what they wanted to hear, offering thoughtful insights that were true but somehow not quite complete. The way she adjusted her presence in a room depending on who else was there, becoming smaller or larger as the situation required, modulating her voice and her opinions to create harmony rather than discord. The way she had built an entire public persona around being thoughtful, gracious, endlessly professional, and how exhausting it was to maintain that construction day after day, year after year. One evening, sitting alone in her study while her husband worked in his studio across the property, Meryl found herself asking a question aloud to the empty room. Who would I be if no one was watching? The silence that followed was profound. She realized she did not know the answer. Or perhaps more accurately, she was afraid of the answer. Because what if, after all these years, after all this work, after becoming one of the most celebrated actresses in history, what if she discovered that the real her, the unguarded her, was someone completely different? What if that person was disappointing, or ordinary, or simply tired? What if the woman beneath all the performances was not particularly interesting at all? The question haunted her through the following days. She found herself watching her own behavior as if from outside, noting the small adjustments she made constantly without thinking. The way she smiled at strangers in the grocery store even when she felt irritable. The way she always had an answer ready when someone asked her about her process or her choices. The way she never admitted confusion or uncertainty in public, never let anyone see her fumbling or lost. The next morning, she called her daughter. They met for lunch in a quiet restaurant in a neighboring town where no one would recognize them or interrupt with requests for photographs or autographs. Meryl ordered tea and sat with her hands wrapped around the cup, feeling the warmth seep into her palms, grounding her. "Can I ask you something?" she said, looking directly at her daughter. "Do you think you really know me?" Her daughter looked at her carefully, taking time with the question, understanding that something important was being asked. "I think I know the person you've let me see," she said finally, choosing her words with precision. "Is that the same as knowing you?" "I'm not sure." The honesty was painful but clean, like a surgical cut. Meryl felt tears gather behind her eyes but did not let them fall. "I'm not sure either," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. They talked for 2 hours, their food growing cold on the table between them. Meryl spoke about the dream, about the script, about the growing sense that she had spent so many years becoming someone magnificent that she had forgotten to check if that someone was actually her. She talked about the exhaustion of always being watched, always being measured, always being expected to be wise and gracious and perfectly composed. Her daughter listened without judgment, without trying to fix anything, without offering reassurances that would have felt empty. And in that listening, Meryl felt something crack open inside her, not breaking, but opening, letting light into a space that had been sealed for too long. "I think," her daughter said carefully, "that you've spent so long being what everyone needs you to be that you don't know what you need anymore. And that's terrifying." Meryl nodded. It was exactly right. In the weeks that followed, Meryl began a quiet experiment in her own life. She started saying no to things without lengthy explanations or apologies. She declined an interview with a prestigious magazine because she simply didn't feel like doing it, offering no elaborate justification. She skipped an industry event she would normally have attended, one where her absence would be noticed and remarked upon. She spent an entire afternoon doing nothing, no reading, no gardening, no phone calls, no emails, just sitting in her favorite chair by the window, watching the light change through the trees as hours passed. At first, the emptiness frightened her. Without the constant motion, without the work and obligations and performances that had structured her entire adult life, she felt untethered, as if she might simply float away into nothingness. The silence of her own mind was louder than she expected, filled with anxious questions and uncomfortable awareness. But gradually, slowly, she began to notice something underneath the fear. A quietness that was not uncomfortable once she stopped resisting it. A sense of herself that was not defined by what she was producing or how she was being perceived. She took long walks in the woods near her home, going alone, deliberately leaving her phone behind on the kitchen counter. She noticed things she had never paid attention to before, the precise way morning light filtered through birch trees, creating moving patterns on the forest floor. The sound of her own breathing, steady and reliable. The feeling of time passing without being measured or managed or filled with productivity. She began to understand that she had been living at a speed that allowed no room for actual presence, only constant momentum, always rushing toward the next thing without fully inhabiting where she was. One afternoon, she found herself at a small local theater where a high school was performing a classic American play. She had seen a notice for it on a bulletin board in town and, on impulse, decided to attend. She bought a ticket and sat in the back row, surrounded by proud parents with their phones ready to record their children's moments in the spotlight. The production was earnest and imperfect, the young actors stumbling over lines, their timing off, their voices sometimes too quiet to hear properly in the small space. But there was something in their unpolished honesty that pierced her. They were not yet skilled enough to hide behind technique. Every emotion showed plainly on their faces, the nervousness, the concentration, the pure joy when they got something right. Every gesture was too big or too small, revealing the gap between what they were trying to express and what they could actually do with their still developing craft. Meryl watched them and felt an unexpected surge of envy. Not for their youth, though that would have been understandable. But for their permission to be incomplete, to fail openly, to try without the weight of legacy pressing down on every choice. They could be terrible and it didn't matter. They could forget their lines and the world wouldn't judge them. They had the freedom to be beginners, to be uncertain, to be themselves without the burden of a reputation that preceded them into every room. When the play ended and the young actors took their bows to thunderous applause from their families, Meryl felt tears on her cheeks. She left quickly, before anyone could recognize her, and drove home in silence. That evening, she took out the script she had been avoiding. She read it again, this time without resistance, letting the words sink into her without defense. The character was not her, not exactly. The details of their lives were different. But the questions the character was asking were her questions. The loneliness the character felt, despite being surrounded by people who loved her, was a loneliness Meryl recognized in her own bones. The sense of having lost something essential while building something impressive. She called the director the next day and said yes. Her agent was surprised. The project was small, independent, unlikely to generate awards attention or significant publicity. But Meryl had made her decision, and it felt like the first truly authentic choice she had made in longer than she wanted to admit. The filming took place over 6 weeks in early spring in a small town in upstate New York. From the first day on set, Meryl approached the work differently than she ever had before. She did not prepare as extensively as was her habit. She did not build elaborate backstories or practice accents or research historical contexts with her characteristic thoroughness. Instead, she simply showed up each morning and let herself be uncertain, let herself not know, let herself discover the character moment by moment rather than arriving with everything already decided. The crew noticed the difference immediately, though no one said anything. There was a looseness to her performance, a willingness to make mistakes and try things that didn't work. She laughed more easily between takes. She asked questions instead of arriving with answers. She seemed, in some fundamental way, more present than anyone had seen her in years. In one scene, her character was supposed to have a breakthrough moment, a realization that would change the course of her life. Meryl had read the scene dozens of times in preparation, had thought about it extensively. But when the camera started rolling and she stood in her mark, she found she didn't know what to do. The emotion she was supposed to access felt false, manufactured, like something she was putting on rather than discovering. So she stopped, right in the middle of the take, and admitted to the director, "I don't know how to play this honestly." The crew fell silent. The director, a woman in her 40s who had admired Meryl's work since childhood, came over to where she stood. They talked quietly for several minutes. They tried different approaches, different intentions, different ways into the moment. Eventually, Meryl suggested they let her improvise, following the shape of the scene but not the exact words, letting her find her way through the emotion rather than performing something predetermined. The director agreed, though Meryl could see the nervousness in her eyes. When they rolled again, Meryl let herself be truly lost in the moment, not knowing what would come next, not performing emotion but actually feeling it, messy and uncertain and real and nothing like the controlled precision she was known for. She fumbled for words. Her voice cracked. She paused for long moments, just breathing, just being. And when the words finally came, they were nothing like what had been written in the script, but they were true in a way the written words had not been. When they called cut, there was silence on set. The crew members looked at each other, uncertain how to respond. Then the director said quietly, her voice thick with emotion, "That's the best work you've ever done." Meryl didn't know if that was true. She had given performances that were technically more impressive, more controlled, more precisely calibrated. But she knew what the director meant. She knew it was the most honest thing she had done, perhaps ever. The most willing to be imperfect, to be uncertain, to be simply and uncomplicatedly human. The rest of the filming proceeded in the same spirit. Meryl found herself actively resisting the impulse to be perfect, to have everything figured out, to arrive with answers instead of questions. It was harder than any technical challenge she had ever faced. Her instinct after decades of work was to control, to shape, to craft every moment with intention. Learning to release that control, to trust uncertainty, felt like learning to walk again after a lifetime of running. During the final week of filming, Meryl had a conversation with one of the young actors in the cast, a woman in her early 20s playing her character's granddaughter. They were sitting outside between setups, drinking coffee in the pale spring sunshine. "Can I ask you something?" the young actress said, nervous but determined. "How do you do it? How do you make it look so effortless?" Meryl smiled, recognizing her younger self in the question. "You want to know the secret?" she said. "It's not effortless. It never has been. I've just gotten very good at hiding the effort. But I'm not sure that's something to aspire to anymore." The young woman looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Meryl said slowly, working out her thoughts as she spoke, "that I've spent my whole career trying to be perfect. Trying to never show the work, never show the struggle, never show the moments when I don't know what I'm doing. And I think I've lost something important in that. I think maybe the work is better when you can see the seams, when you can see the human being underneath trying to figure it out." She paused, looking out at the landscape around them. "You're young," she continued. "You have time to learn this earlier than I did. Don't be afraid to be uncertain. Don't be afraid to fail. Don't spend your whole life performing being confident when what you actually feel is lost. That's the thing no one tells you, everyone is lost. The only difference is some of us are better at pretending we're not." The young actress listened, taking in the words like medicine. When filming wrapped a few days later, she approached Meryl one last time. "Thank you," she said simply. "For being honest with me. Nobody else has been." Meryl hugged her, feeling the weight of what had been passed between them. "Be honest with yourself," she said. "That's the hardest part. But it's the only part that matters." The film premiered 8 months later at a small festival in Colorado. It was not a blockbuster. It did not generate awards buzz or significant media attention. But people who saw it felt something shift inside them, a recognition of their own hidden questions, their own unexamined lives, their own carefully maintained performances of having it all figured out. The reviews were respectful but not effusive. The film played in a few independent theaters and then moved quietly to streaming platforms. Meryl did not do much press for it. She gave a handful of interviews, but in them she was more honest than she had ever been about her own struggles with identity and authenticity. Some journalists didn't know what to do with this honesty, tried to shape it into more familiar narratives about aging in Hollywood or the challenges facing women in the industry. But a few understood what she was really saying, and those conversations felt like small gifts, moments of genuine connection rather than performance. Now, months after the film's release, when the dream comes, and it still does, though less frequently, she responds to it differently. She no longer wakes in panic, heart pounding, feeling as if she has been caught in some terrible deception. Instead, she lies in the darkness and asks the dream what it wants to tell her. Sometimes the answer is clear: you are still hiding in some ways, still performing, still not quite willing to be fully seen. Sometimes the answer is gentler: you are learning, you are beginning, you are becoming. At 76, Meryl Streep is discovering that the most difficult role she has ever played is not any character written by someone else. It is the role of herself, unguarded, uncertain, still unfinished. And perhaps that is the point. Perhaps we are all unfinished, no matter how accomplished we appear, no matter how many years we have lived, no matter what the world has decided about who we are. She thinks often now about what she will leave behind. Not the films, though those will endure and will be studied and analyzed for generations. Not the awards, though they mark a certain kind of achievement and sit in a cabinet in her home, rarely looked at. But something smaller and more essential: the permission to continue questioning, to remain uncertain, to admit when you don't know, to be a beginner even at the end. The other day, her granddaughter came to visit. They sat together in the garden, watching the late afternoon light slant through the trees. Out of nowhere, the child asked, "Grandma, what does it feel like to be famous?" Meryl thought about the question carefully before answering, wanting to be honest without burdening this young person with complexities she couldn't yet understand. "It feels like wearing a beautiful coat that doesn't quite fit," she said finally. "Everyone tells you how lovely it is, and it is lovely. But you're always aware that it's not quite yours, not quite right. And you spend so much energy holding it closed, keeping it in place, that you forget you could take it off." "Why don't you?" her granddaughter asked, with the perfect logic of childhood. Meryl smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I'm learning," she said. "I'm finally learning." And in that simple admission, there was more truth than in any performance she had ever given, more authenticity than in any interview or acceptance speech or carefully crafted public appearance. The truth of not knowing, of still becoming, of being brave enough to admit that after a lifetime of mastery, she was allowing herself to be a beginner again. Her granddaughter reached over and took her hand, small fingers wrapping around larger ones, and they sat together in comfortable silence as the light continued to change and the day moved toward evening, two people at different ends of life, both learning how to be themselves.